evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight to the East Hampton Library to tonight's talk. We have with us Joan Baum, who is going to be discussing Ayn Rand's novel *The Fountainhead* and doing a little bit of comparison to the film with Gary Cooper and Patricia Neal. But without further ado, I'll turn over tonight's talk to Joan.
Thank you, Steve. I thank all of you for coming because you give me an opportunity to run off at the mouth every time I think of something that I want to talk about, and you very graciously allow me to. And to folks at home in pajamas, envious that we are, thank you for tuning in. Why this talk? I always like to give an explanation. This one is a little bit arch. I saw a movie last year, The Brutalist, and it was about an architect, a Hungarian, who comes to this country after he's let out of the concentration camp, and he moves to become as successful as he was originally before he was sent to the camps. And as the movie goes on, and it is long, actually that's not fair because everything Ayn Rand wrote was long too, but as the movie went on, I was very impatient with it. There was something missing. And what was missing, it seemed to me, was a deep connection that should have been there between the character who had been in a concentration camp and an architect, and the kind of architecture that attracted him, brutalism. In other words, it was lacking a vision. So as I was muttering to myself, I thought, now, what work does concern an architect with a vision? And immediately the Fountainhead came to mind. And of course, it's like once something bizarre happens to you and you talk to other people, everything becomes a bizarre experience. It's all over the place. And that's what happened to me. Once I hit on Ayn Rand, it seemed to me that Ayn Rand was everywhere. And I'm not just talking about when The Fountainhead came out in 1943. What I saw over the last year were references to her by Elon Musk, who quotes her a lot. Former Fed head Alan Greenspan, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, the Rands are in there, and the billionaire TV shark personality Mark Cuban, who has a fortune and a gorgeous yacht, which he named the Fountainhead. And then she is constantly referred to by members of Congress who identify themselves as MAGA supporters and libertarians and conservatives. But they invoke her, I think, short-sightedly. They cite her laissez-faire political economy, but they forget something that she kept on reminding the world, that there were three big names that were responsible for civilization: Aristotle, Aquinas, and Ayn. And all three are important, and probably the one that is most important and that rarely gets cited by people who say they love her philosophy. But one thing is her emphasis on reason and logic. That was for her the most valuable characteristic of man. And of course, she got that from Aristotle, who said that man is a rational animal. Well, we won't talk metaphorically about rational, but he meant capable of cognition. And that's what she looked for first, before she checked out laissez-faire philosophies. So I thought, this is amazing. Everyone is citing her. A few years ago, John Oliver, on his TV show, he had a section devoted to her, and it was called "How Is She Still a Thing?" And she is. The great attraction she had when the Fountainhead came out, though, was for young people. And I remember, a moment later, that there were so many young people who had read The Fountainhead and who were so moved by the heroism and the idealism and the individualism that they became acolytes. And I want to say that the Ayn Rand Institute for Objectivism, the name of her philosophy, is still in existence. That's remarkable. I wanted to give the talk, and I want to make it clear that I'm not endorsing her. I wanted to give the talk because she is. I think John Oliver, asked the right question. How is she still a thing? And why? And is she a thing today? And I think she is. Young people are looking for some philosophy that will inspire them. And she wrote those books, The Fountainhead and then Atlas Shrugged, at a time when social welfare policies politically were in the lead in this country. So she's quite a daring woman, and I've become fascinated by her. So the talk is as much on her as on the Fountainhead. And in fact, she is one of the very few novelists I can cite who wrote a novel of ideas. There are 4 elements to writing fiction: character, theme, setting, and plot. And she kind of dispenses with character in a way because all of her heroes are always heroes. All of her villains are always villains. There's no change. There's no recognition. And what she uses is, I think, a pretty attractive narrative, usually with romance, and builds on that a philosophy. And there's always a part in all of her books where the main character, in case you didn't get the philosophy, spouts it again and again and again. So the book is repetitious, The Fountainhead, and even Atlas Shrugged. But I think the prose is pretty lean and clean, as she was. So people remember The Fountainhead, or think they remember it, but do have a sense of having read it and been moved by it, more so than Atlas Shrugged, which comes in at 1,128 pages. So I'm just going to briefly tell you a little bit about it, but I want to focus on The Fountainhead and hear your responses to it. She started writing The Fountainhead in 1940, and it came out in 45. This was during the war, and it reached an audience looking for heroism, looking for good guys. So, yes, it's simplistic in what it puts forth of character, but it suited the times, at least for the popular readership. The pros, the reviewers, the critics. About half of them bombed it. And they probably still do. And the movie even more so. So I think that talking about her, she's a powerful woman, and her protagonists are powerful people. And in Atlas Shrugged, Well, also in Fountainhead, the women who come to the fore are really strong. So it has an attraction, I think, particularly for young people still looking for some kind of world of integrity, of vision, and she delivered. She actually, although I mentioned The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, she actually wrote more novels, a total of 4, and many works of philosophy, economics, screenplays. Her first passion, and I think probably her abiding passion, was to be a screenwriter in Hollywood. And she wrote books that advanced, including the plays, her theories. She even wrote a play that wound up on Broadway and had a trial at its center. And during the performance, 12 people were picked from the audience every night to be, the jury. So the more I read about her, and I'm hardly a scholar, the more impressed I was with her energy. Now, we've mentioned her interest in philosophy. It was more than an interest, it was a passion. And it's called objectivism, sometimes aesthetic objectivism. And she herself defined herself as not a conservative, not a libertarian. She didn't like those things. She called herself a radical capitalist. If you get a chance, you must get on, I think it's on Netflix, and watch at least one of the 2 interviews she gave to Mike Wallace in the 50s. First of all, she's worth watching. This woman is steel, and she sits there, she never blinks no matter what he throws at her, that other people might pause for. She just coolly, she's amazing, coolly responds. At one point, he referred to her philosophy as Randism, and she very coolly looked at him and she says, "I do not like that term." So she reminded him that she's not only to be understood for objectivism, but that objectivism itself should be understood in a wide way. And the wide way is a philosophy, a look upon life that had as at its core man using the only faculty that distinguishes himself from any other living creature, and that is reason. So everyone who goes around and cites her, typically only for her economy, laissez-faire capitalism, to take her at her own terms, doesn't really understand that she had a very wide breadth of how she wanted to convey this. And somehow, and I don't know, but somehow sex is involved in this as well. Because she was pretty freewheeling. And we'll go into that in a minute, because one of the big differences, for those of you who have read and remember the book, is the difference between the movie and the book. In the movie, Gary Cooper, how should we say, forcibly seduces her. In the book, it is very clear it's rape. And it's very clear she's a virgin at 22 or 23. Even her father says in the book, why? But the book itself is filled with much more sophistication, particularly on sex. But no way was Hollywood going to allow a scene to take place that looked like a rape. So it looked like a pretty hot seduction, to which she succumbs. She defined it as objectivism, and I want to get her own words before we go further, as a concept of man as a heroic being with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity, and reason as his only absolute. Now that's pretty packed, and it gets lost in a lot of people who claim that they love Ayn Rand. What certainly gets lost is reason, Aristotle. And boy, she knew her Aristotle. In fact, Atlas Shrugged is divided into Aristotelian books or huge chapters. And so much of Atlas Shrugged, but also in the Fountainhead, has to do with deductive reasoning. Aristotle was the philosopher of the syllogism. You don't like the conclusion? Change the premises. But when you change them, they've got to create a logical form according to what was considered the syllogistic reasoning. And people lose this. So I'm not about to say, hey, let's open to the Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged. Take an idea and see if we can follow it. She does. And therefore, when a friend said to me, oh, I'm so glad you're going to give a talk and explain her, I can't explain her. All I can do is to say how she saw her own pursuit. But I can also say that one of the prompts for this talk, as I said, is that I feel that most people cherry pick. They pull out one or two parts of her life and her work and say, I'm a follower. And at some point, you wonder whether she adhered to her own philosophy. I'll save that in a moment. But again, I'm not endorsing it, but I am very clearly urging you to read it because I think it's fascinating. She is really a moralist. And even though she loved Frank Lloyd Wright and wrote him numerous letters asking him to draw models for the drawings of Howard Rourke's buildings, and he refused. At some point, she just kept it up. She was relentless. And it's amazing how much she succeeded that way. She and Wright became friends. Although Wright was from a religious background, she was an atheist, very strongly so, and she objected to a lot of his other influences, particularly nature. She was a city gal. She loved New York. And she was also a patriot. I've read some of the letters, they're wonderful. She loved the Declaration of Independence. Why? Because man is to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. I'm sure she knew that at one point, in one draft, Jefferson meant by happiness the entrepreneurial happiness of having property. But they let it go. So these were inalienable rights in the Declaration, and they were for her the code for America, the best country in the whole world ever. And she was deeply disturbed in the 40s, clearly, about the drift to social welfare state, and particularly in New York, which for many people was known as Little Russia. So who was Ayn Rand? And how did she get that way? Her dates are 1905 to 1982. And she was, to me, the leading woman intellectual in America. She was born 1 year before Hannah Arendt, whom I also consider the other leading female intellectual, but they never met. Hannah Arendt was Europe, Ayn Rand was New York and Hollywood. She was born in Russia, in St. Petersburg. I think that was significant in 1905. And she was born a Jew in Tsarist Russia. Her name originally was Alisa Zinovyevna Rosenbaum. And she changed it, not because she was a Jew. Many people who left Russia still had families there, and they were frightened that what they were writing might turn against the family. And so changing your name, for some, clearly Jews were escaping the Jewish reference, but not she. And she was born 1 month after Bloody Sunday riots against the Tsar, Nicholas II. The monarchists hit back, and also against intellectuals and revolutionaries and Jews. Lenin called that day the dress rehearsal for the October 1917 revolution. She was middle class. Family did okay. Father had a pharmacy. When she was 12 years old, the October Revolution began. And I believe that this is an important event. I haven't seen it touted, but I believe it. She saw the crazies come into town and totally destroy her father's pharmacy and, in effect, destroy the family. And she came to hate what the revolution stood for, the collectivism that would take away and destroy what her father had worked so hard to build. She left Russia when she was 21, and she was not one of those emigres who fled a pogrom or fled anything. She left because she wanted to be a writer, and she wanted to be a writer in Hollywood. And so she leaves. The family doesn't protest. The family, in fact, did not want to go to America and never did. She wanted to be a screenwriter in Hollywood, and that was her first landing place, not New York. I haven't read closely a biography of her, but I don't understand what I've read in summary, that she would go down the Hollywood lots. Oh, hi, Cecil. Oh, hi, Hal. I mean, whatever it was, she connected with the biggies immediately, and they connected with her. It was amazing. So she started out pretty successfully. She wrote a lot of screenplays, and I was surprised even to find that she became an extra, a movie extra. And the story goes that one day she was roaming epic as an extra, and she looks across the crowd, and their eyes meet, and it's Frank O'Connor. Now, when I read that, I said, Frank O'Connor? The only Frank O'Connor I knew of was the poet. And no, it was not Frank O'Connor, the poet. It was Frank O'Connor, a Hollywood extra who was in a number of movies, and they just fell in love. And that was it. They got married. In the Mike Wallace interviews, I recall him baiting her at some point, saying, what does your husband do, and how did he support himself? champion of the heroic male. She said, "You're an artist." And Wallace says, "Successful?" And she didn't flinch. She got him off the subject, but it was clear where he was going with that. And I don't know what the dynamics of the relationship were. I do know that when she attracted acolytes, she met a guy by the name of Nathaniel Blumenthal, who was 25 years her junior, a psychologist promoting self-esteem. He was so smitten with her, he changed his name from Blumenthal to Nathaniel Brandon. Get it? B-R-A-N-D. So that he could incorporate her in his name. And they became the Brandons and the O'Connors fast friends. At some point, Brandon and Ayn became lovers. And her take was that it was with the okay of their mates. I doubt that. But that's what the story was. And eventually, I think there was an acrimonious split. And it would be hard not to say why. But Brandon, while he was still in smitten land, founded the Institute, the nonprofit Ayn Rand Center for the Advancement of Objectivism in Santa Ana, California. It still exists. Moving on, in the 40s, as I said, she began working on the Fountainhead, finished it in 43, it was published in 45. In 1947, she testified before HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee. Didn't turn in anything. She was criticizing a movie, The Song of Russia, 1944, starring Robert Taylor, Susan Peters, and Tchaikovsky. And she said the movie was pro-Russia, which of course it could have been in 1944. And it was a disaster. It was terrible and full of lies. Well, this was a little early for her to come on that way, but she never changed her mind. In 1957, Atlas Shrugged came out, the biggie. And she had started that just about when she was finishing The Fountainhead. And she has said that The Fountainhead is merely an overture to Atlas Shrugged. I read it. I read it in a week. I found it fascinating, as I did The Fountainhead. Not great literature. There's a lot of repetition. She's not too good on nature description. And again, her main characters are really not challenged. But she uses, and she's good at it as a screenwriter, she uses the novel to advance her ideas. That's what she wants to do. In 1960, I should say that she said The Fountainhead was merely an overture to Atlas. In 1960, she gave up fiction. She gave a lot of speeches. She was very active in her institute. She endorsed Barry Goldwater for president in 1964. In 1982, she died of heart failure at 77. And I believe at least one of the interviews online shows her typically with a long cigarette holder smoking away. In 1999, she's on a postage stamp. That is incredible. And as Steve noted, oh my God, 33 cents. And only in 2023 was the Journal of Ayn Rand Studies discontinued. That's a remarkable career. And again, John Oliver has it right. Was she a thing? Yes, she was. And the why intrigues me. I think it will intrigue you. And now to what really made her mom so many people, the Fountainhead. I'm going to hold up a copy of the book, The Fountainhead. Very 40s looking. Okay. And now I'm going to hold up a copy of the movie poster. Yeah, oh my, where did the building go? And in case you weren't intrigued, we read, "No man takes what's mine." And you'd never know it was an idea. And then off to the side it says, "A picture to remember," from Warner Brothers. And of course it's the shot of the seduction. And next time you take a look at the movie, see how far it really is removed from a rape. And something to think about, I don't have a conclusion for you, is why Ayn Rand insisted that it be a rape scene. It is very clearly. However, quickly to the book. It is the story of Howard Roark, who is laughing in the first line. And he's laughing because he doesn't care. He's being tossed out of the most prestigious architectural institute. And he needs money. So as he, I should say this, he's 22. The whole book takes about 18 years. But he's 22 for a long time in the book. And he's got red hair. And the red hair isn't just incidental. She remarks on it all through the book, like it's a leitmotif. I don't know why, but you can think about that. This is a provocative book. In any case, Howard Roark in the book does not look like Gary Cooper, who was 46 when he made the movie, and Patricia Neal was 22. And those looking for not just timely, but local references may know that Gary Cooper is buried in the Roman Catholic Cemetery in Southampton. Having said that, his wife, who would not give him a divorce, to marry Patricia Neal, and he saved up money and gave it to her for an abortion. It was a very tough relationship. She didn't make out too well with him. Anyway, a lot of young people fell in love with Howard Roark. He was the individual. He was defying the institute. He'll make his own work, his own art, his own beauty. He lives for the purity of his vision. And that is the central part of objectivism. He lives not only for his vision, he has disdain for the past and for convention. And at the end of the novel is defined by the skyscraper he builds for this very wealthy man whom he had converted to his way, but finally could not deliver. Young people bought the book by the thousands and millions. And I read somewhere that many of them named their dog Roark. Well, people called the book romantic realism. Her heroes are always fit and attractive. They never change. She also, and this may surprise you, it surprised me, has a great sense of humor. The book is filled not just with satire, and boy does she do it, particularly with the lefties in Greenwich Village in the 40s. Oh, she takes them apart. And there were many communists and socialists like Howard Lasky, remember that name, whom she used as the model for the welfare reign in the book. And she calls him Tooey. That's his last name. There's also Wesley Mooch. The book was turned down by 12 publishers. And there was just one guy at Bob's Merrill who thought it was terrific. And he put his own reputation on the line. And it was translated and has been into more than 30 languages and has sold millions. She made her living on her own work. The typical response, though, when it came out was this, and I think this tells you something about the times as well. More than any other work, the Fountainhead reawakened popular enthusiasm for a way of thinking and a way of life that in 1943 was regarded by virtually every sector of intellectuals as outmoded, discredited, even dangerous. The whole idea of individualism versus the socialist influence became her trademark. The lone rebel rides again. She's been called an egotist. I don't think she is. An egotist is a psychological state. It's characterized by an inflated sense of importance, leading to boastfulness and narcissism and self-promotion. The right word for her is egoist, which is a philosophical concept, turning on self-interest as the right and proper and only rational motivation for man. These ideas come out prominently in the Fountainhead. There's about 7 minutes at the end where Rourke is on trial and gets up to defend himself. Why is he on trial? He had agreed, this is interesting, he had agreed to build the Cortlandt Homes, a public housing project. And he gave it to Peter Keating, who was a kind of sellout. She called them second-handers to work on because he needed money and he needed reputation, and said, okay, you can have this project, it's mine, but you have to promise me and you have to put it in writing. You will never, ever allow one change over what I've done. Absolutely. And then, of course, sells him out. To which Rourke's response is, he slips out one night with Dominique as his assistant and sets the whole project on fire. He will not endure anything that has threatened his integrity. And now he's on trial defending himself. You're sure I did it? I'm not going to claim I didn't. And let me tell you why. And, of course, the verdict comes in his favor. And, that's the great ending of a great big novel that is celebrating his integrity. In the movie, Gary Cooper has to recite this. And afterwards he was asked, about the speech. It's a long chunk, and they even cut some of it, which did not make Ayn Rand happy at all. In fact, she said, "You do it exactly the way the book is. If you don't, I'll quit." They didn't, she didn't, but she was angry. Max Steiner did the music. We have all the lift up of the great building. It was done by the director King Vidor, who originally did not want Gary Cooper. He wanted first Bogey, and then he wanted Clark Gable. And Patricia Neal, who was an unknown and very young, he didn't particularly want. He wanted first Barbara Stanwyck. It's said that Cooper, who didn't know Patricia Neal at the time, was at the audition and was totally unimpressed. Well, things changed. And if you have read about Ayn Rand as a screenwriter, she really knew movies. She had certain preferences that you can see in the Fountainhead. She liked to take views from a woman's point of view, or from a man's point of view, aware that the woman is watching. So she really, and she loved to have first the broad shot, and then the close-up, as in the quarry scene. And so she narrows in, and she does that a lot. Cooper and Neal, of course, had a hot affair, and things did not go well. Rand didn't particularly like the movie, but she didn't particularly at the end like Gary Cooper. She may have been the only female who didn't sleep with him. And again, I say the movie is okay, but it's really less than okay if you read the book. Much richer. I know people always say that, it's a cliche. But anyway, Atlas Shrugged, I'll just mention because it's the book that exemplifies the ideas. Here's the Fountainhead laying them out with Howard Rourke, the vision, and then there is Atlas Shrugged, which shows what happens when all these geniuses like Rourke, who are getting shafted by the government and the world is going to hell, what happens if they just, in fact, go on strike? And they do, they start disappearing. And the book does have this suspenseful, where are they going? What's happening to these people? And particularly the railroad. And everything slows down, rots out, is corroded when the brains leave town. And the brains leave town because they're getting shafted. As she said, the second-handers, the welfare lovers, the people who feel that it's more important to love others than themselves and use that as a springboard, when they get in charge, civilization runs. Here, it's a weird book, not just because it's long, but it's about the philosophy at heart, not of a Howard Rourke, but of a character who's even more Howard Rourke than Howard Rourke. His name is John Galt, and he doesn't appear until the last third of the book. And then there's that title, Atlas Shrugged. Well, you all know Rockefeller Center, Atlas. He's got the burden of the world on his shoulders because we have the audacity to rebel against Zeus, and now all the needs and powers of the world are on his shoulders. And she got to thinking, what if Atlas shrugged? And all of that disappears. What would happen? What would happen if all the brains of all the Rourkes just went away and let all the second handlers go in charge? They weren't smart. They Yeah, well, we will refrain from analogies. Certainly, she was saying the world needs creative individualists. I'm not quite sure what she would think of Elon Musk, though I think she would be suspect of his intelligence. Not lack of intelligence, but lack of practical ability to apply it in an Aristotelian, rational manner. Did she live by her beliefs? She accepted Medicare and Social Security from 1974 to 1982. And when she was challenged why, she said, I accepted $11,002. That's what was owing to me as a moral right for having to pay taxes and contributions to programs she didn't believe in. She also accepted Medicare benefits for lung cancer treatment. She died with an estate of substance. At her funeral, a 6-foot floral arrangement of a dollar bill was next to her casket. I think she would have laughed. And she would have maybe added some despising remark about how that hardly represented what she stood for. Thank you very much for listening in. I'll be very happy to take questions that I probably can't answer. Yes?
Joan, do you know how and when she learned to speak English?
In Russia. She went to the University of Leningrad, and she was an absolutely top-rated student. She was interested in just about everything, but she really had a passion for movies, and she had a love of New York and the skyscrapers, which were distinct.
Wait a second.
Did she ever have any children?
No.
The other one is any of her screenplays, were they ever made in films, one of which we might know?
I don't know. That's an excellent question. I don't think so. I do know that her plays, stage plays, one made it to Broadway, were successful. Her
I'm in Hollywood, she wasn't very good.
Well, she was.
She didn't produce any.
She didn't do a blockbuster. That's what this is.
They use her for any of the screenplay or for the Fountainhead?
I'm not quite sure.
Probably adapted the Fountainhead from the book.
Mm-hmm.
She had any part.
She wrote the screenplay.
Oh, she did.
She did. I'm sorry, I should have made that clear. She did. And that was doubling her anger when they cut, particularly the speech that Rourke was delivering at the trial. I have to say, I confess, there were parts in the Fountainhead when I thought, oh boy, here we go again. The same philosophy, almost the same words. Different people are repeating. But as I said, what the book also contains that the movie didn't was this savage, funny, witty satirization of the liberals and the socialists, particularly in New York. She loved New York. She loved Hollywood. Yeah.
Do you know why she named the book Fountainhead? And also, I saw the movie here 2 nights ago. I had found it, in some respects, hilarious. Very heavy-handed.
Yes.
When you talk about Ayn Rand, taking a look at Frank O'Connor and falling in love with him right away, that kind of scene, it was so ridiculous.
It was.
Because Neal goes to the quarry, and Rourke has no money, so he's working in the quarry, and Cameron follows his sinewy arms. And she's up there on the hill, and she lights up like she's in heat.
Yeah.
And so the rape scene was very interesting because I watched it and I thought, I wonder if he raped her, but the equivalent of pulling the shade down in the old movies, he just walked out, touched the door, and he
Yes, that's right.
And you suspect she didn't mind.
Well, yes, and that is in the movie. It's much more profound and troubling in the book because it's much more graphic.
It isn't as exciting because the red butler is very that's scary. And you're just a young girl and you think, what happened?
Well, in the book, again, more than the movie, it's even better. And it's more obvious that what may be a violation becomes a pleasure.
And the Fountainhead, we don't know what actually called it the Fountainhead.
I don't know. I haven't read, but it's obvious that the Fountainhead of civilization, the brain, that's where it comes from. And if you don't act as though you are someone who has a brain, and more than that, has to use it productively. So I think that's what attracted her to Frank Lloyd Wright, who also was a rebel in many ways, not just in art and sculpture, but certainly personally. Incredible life. Any other questions? Well, go home and read it. So far.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The question asked is, why did Rand not object to the seduction scene in the movie when she intended it to be written?
She objected to a lot of scenes that were cut, and she obviously knew the Hollywood code at the time. There was just no way she could, with her objections, follow through and see them realized. But her more potent opposition was to scenes in which, her philosophy was being discussed and defined, and they were cut. So there were many, as I said, the book covers 18 years. The movie, several, but not more. Yes.
So, I realized I saw a movie that I had never read that book, but I did read Fountainhead. And I wondered, a long time ago, the railroad, and all the people along the railroad come out with their guns to protect the railroad tracks.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that scene? In the book.
Yeah, I thought it was terrific.
I mean, I remember it.
Mhm.
It was, to me, it was extraordinary.
She, by the way, speaking of railroads and that Atlas Shrugged, has an enormous amount of information, technology. Boy, did she learn a lot about railroads, mining, and quarry. She was an insatiable reader and all hooked. I was very impressed by what she was able to digest, and no one ever accused her of not knowing the turf. And I think it's remarkable in that day that the heroine of Atlas Shrugged is a railroad magnate. She's an engineer, and she's fascinated with machines. I have a problem about Atlas Shrugged as a utopia, because when all these great brains decide, let's leave, let's let them all start our own civilization in the mountains somewhere, they do so, and it's unreal, not quite clear. And throughout the book, the female is the real protagonist, it seems to me. Again, she never changes. She's always like that. She moves from man to man to man. They're all Howard Rorkean, but they get more so. And there's always this intuitive look that they know that she knows that they know, and they'll all get together again. I'm intrigued enough by her and by the books to want to read really good biography. But I'm going to go back and look again because I think it's a wonderful theatrical experience watching her with Mike Wallace. Penny obviously was fascinated by her because he had her back. And he never used this. Thank you.